Welcome to Routing for Success, the show where we interview today's top logistics professionals, providing them a platform to share their stories and best practices. I'm your host, Emily Blair.
And I'm your host, Jay Kirsch. In today's episode, we interview Tim Goff for the second time. Tim discusses how to address risk profiles in your contract, the quickest way to lose $2 million, and why reading your contract should be at the top of your list as a FedEx contractor. You're not going to want to miss this one.
This episode is brought to you by AP Equipment Financing. AP Equipment Financing can bring you the best deals on step vans, panel vans, cutaways, and more, deliver them straight to your facility, and finance them with low monthly installment options. Click the link in the description to this episode or visit apfinancing.com.
Tim Goff, welcome to your second appearance on the Routing for Success podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always enjoy this podcast, and it's an honor to be back on with you folks.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to come chat with us. We have a little different topic to talk about today. A lot of times we talk about running FedEx businesses, what you're doing, and I think we'd like to take it to a little higher level today with you, Tim. Okay. You know a lot about corporate FedEx, a lot more than I ever will. And I'd like to ask you to talk about the last FedEx quarterly earnings, which were up and appeared to be doing very well. And why is it that we're hearing from so many contractors that their margins are too tight and they're struggling?
Yeah, wow, we're going strong right off the bat. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is obviously a topic of intense conversation around the contractor network. It's really not complicated, to be honest with you. So, back during the spring, we had our transformation, essentially how to prosper during the FedEx transformation webinar series. And one of those, we talked to the leading analyst who covers FedEx. In fact, we're going to have him on. We're going to do another webinar series starting in September, and we're going to have him on again talking about their next quarterly report. But what you see when you listen to FedEx, and I encourage all FedEx contractors to do two things. You have to read the contract. You have to understand at a detailed level what you're accountable for, but you can always leverage that contract to your advantage where possible. And then you have to understand FedEx as a business. So you need to watch their quarterly earnings statements, understand what's going on in there. So we looked at their plan for 2025. Remember, the fiscal year starts on June 1st. It's a weird fiscal year at FedEx. And essentially in their end of 24 statement and their 25 forecast, they said revenue was going to be flat. What we heard in their third quarter announcement back in March was that we were at 2019 volume. And of course, those of us in the contractor network, we could understand that. That's what we were feeling, and a lot of volume had disappeared because the economy is struggling a little bit in that regard. So they forecasted their fiscal year 2025, June 1st, 24 through May 31st, 2025, to be flat. So it's still flat. You shouldn't think that revenue is coming to save you. One of my messages to contractors is no one's coming to save you. You've got to figure out how to handle what you're in right now. So it's not going to get better. Hope is not a strategy. So what we're seeing in their numbers is that flat in 2025, and you won't see any increase until FY26. And so then if you look at corporate earnings in the non-FedEx world and you look at freight waves and other sources of information, what you find is the general trucking market is forecasting to have some slight increase beginning in the second half of 2025 calendar year. And that coincides with the FedEx forecast for a 3% increase in their FY26 fiscal year. And you just have to remember that the first half of their fiscal year is actually in calendar year 2025. So all these numbers are lining up. The FedEx forecast is matching the industry forecast. And so then that leads to the primary question, how can FedEx announce record earnings And contractors are feeling the pain that we're feeling, and it's legit. And it's not difficult. If you analyze the numbers, what you see is record profits on declining revenue. Now, typically, that's mutually exclusive. So why is it that FedEx could get increasing profits even though they had declining revenue? Well, because they cut costs. And a whole bunch of that cost cutting was on contractors. So the business that I sold in 2023 took a almost 20% revenue reduction in 1 year through the FedEx optimization effort. And I was not alone. There are many other contractors who have suffered the effects of optimization. This is why I say that the benevolent dictator is dead. If FedEx was ever trying to look out for your business, and I don't think they ever were, we just kind of thought they were, they're not doing it now. They're looking out for themselves. And my message throughout my webinar series is that every entity is going to do what's in their own best interest. And that's what FedEx is doing. They're not making plans to protect your business. They have 100% confidence that no matter what they do, they're going to have a contractor network. And the pain you feel, they don't feel. And so they're trying to optimize their business to compete in the new world order. Amazon is really stressing FedEx and UPS. Even though Amazon is a retailer, they're just moving volume that FedEx otherwise would have moved. And so they have to fight that battle. Then there's been a lot of talk about, are they going to sell freight? Well, they certainly, in their last report, made it pretty clear they're going to do something with freight. There's not a huge amount of the improvement in the numbers that you see in FedEx in general from freight taking over what used to be ground. Ground is gone now. You can't say FedEx ground anymore, but because it refers to something that doesn't exist. But freight is not a major player. They're not something to be scared of in what used to be the ground business. My personal opinion is they will spin it off, and it's probably worth $25 billion on the stock market as an individual company. If they sell it, they can put a lot of cash in their pocket, but then they're out of that LTL market, which is, there's only about 10 major companies that can survive in that market. So the net of all this is that Express is losing money. Freight is making a little bit of money. The former ground business is profitable, and the corporation in general is profitable because of cost reductions. Huge amounts of those cost reductions were achieved through revenue reductions in the contractor network. That's why contractors are feeling the pain.
That does make a lot of sense, Tim. And, we try to keep it really positive with the relationship between FedEx and contractors. This is a podcast for contractors to better their business. So what you said about FedEx becoming more efficient on their operating costs, how can contractors approach what's happening in the FedEx ecosystem how can they approach that and continue to grow and continue to be profitable with what's happening on the FedEx corporate side of things?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like I said, no one's coming to save you. So you really need to look at your own business, and you have to understand your risk profile for the business that you're operating. And you need to do what every other business does in the world. You need to have your own strategy. And in order to have a strategy, you need to do some deep dive on your own numbers and what your opportunities are. Do a SWOT analysis on your business. What's a SWOT analysis? What's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And we talk about that in the webinar series, how to do these things. And this is what companies do in the real world. Oftentimes, contractors have just left it to FedEx to tell them what to do and give them a contract, and then they survive in this pretty good ecosystem, right? It's still a good business. And if you look at the reasons small businesses go out of business. So if you zoom out from the FedEx contractor world and just look at business in general, most small businesses last less than 5 years. And they go out of business not because they didn't have a good business idea. That could have been the case, but the primary reason is cash flow. They can't get paid for the work that they're doing, or their costs are too high for the revenue that they have. Does that sound familiar? I mean, this is what's going on in the FedEx marketplace, right? And so when you then zoom back in on that, what happens at FedEx? Well, you get paid every week. So FedEx is cash flowing your business. Every business in the world would love to get all their revenue every week. And, you know, that gives you a lot of advantages. You have cash coming in, and then you can also, because you're getting paid every week, you have weekly data that you can analyze at a micro level and understand what's going on in your business. When I was a corporate executive running a global division, we typically might have got a monthly look, but was primarily a quarterly look. And so as a FedEx contractor, you can get a down in the dirt weekly look at how your business is doing. And you can look at profitability weekly. And so you can make adjustments to how you're operating your business. That's a huge advantage to be in the FedEx network. Then you have a Fortune 50 company creating the strategy. Okay, well, Fortune 50 companies borrow money on 75-year terms. And so that means a lender thinks they're going to be here at least 75 years, right? And so you have a major giant who's going to be around writing the strategy for the business that you're trying to execute. So that's an advantage. Then you don't have any collections requirements. You don't have to win new business, keep old business. You don't have any sales, SG&A. These are all advantages in the FedEx network, right? Now, the downside of being a FedEx contractor is you have a contract with a Fortune 50 company, and they kind of expect you to behave like you're a Fortune 50 company. And so the compliance requirements drive cost in your business. And you have to figure out how to manage those costs in a way that helps you be successful. Now, what is FedEx doing to achieve these optimizations? They have internal targets, and they're analyzing this business. They're analyzing your business in general, not yours specifically, and they're creating financial targets that they think you should be able to hit. And then they're adjusting how we get paid based on those targets. And so here's an example in the line haul world. Last year on September 1st, when the new contract went into effect, I think it was September 1st, give or take a day or two, there was a major change in the fuel surcharge. So in the line haul world, you get paid a fuel surcharge per mile. And there's also a portion of the fuel surcharge built into the base VMR rate. Even if fuel was costing $2 a gallon, you would still get 17 cents, shall we say, of fuel surcharge. So if you then look at what happened, FedEx reduced what they were paying us for fuel on September 1st last year by almost 10%. That's a 10% reduction in what they were paying you for fuel. And I saw companies lose thousands of dollars a year in what they were getting the year before. They're still doing the same thing. Their trucks are getting the same mileage. They're getting paid less money. But that was a net increase in profit for FedEx. And then this year's contract, they're adjusting it again. They made a major move last year. They're making a minor move in this contract, and they're getting it to what amounts to 7 miles per gallon. So what does that mean? That means you have to buy fuel at wholesale price, and you have to run your truck, not fleet average. Each individual truck has to operate at 7 miles per gallon or higher in order for you to break even on the fuel surcharge. Otherwise, you're coming out of pocket for fuel. Now, FedEx probably thinks you ought to come out a little bit of pocket in order to pay for fuel. But I always say a strategic objective should be that you need to operate your company in a way that FedEx fuel surcharge covers your total cost of fuel. So there's just one example of FedEx monitoring macro data on the contractor network and making adjustments that put money in their pocket. All those cost savings help them achieve their corporate targets. And then remember, there's always been this conversation amongst contractors. Wow, Ground is making all this money. How come they're not giving it to us? Well, because Ground is part of a larger entity. And they have that larger entity is the FedEx brand, and they have shareholders, and they're paying dividends, and they got to get the cash from somewhere. and they were taking it from the former ground division on a regular basis. So it's extremely important that contractors understand you're no longer, if you ever were, you're no longer operating in an area where the benevolent dictator is watching out for you. They are squeezing every penny they can. They're trying to save $6 billion, right? That's a lot of money. And so they're going to get some of that from growth. They're going to get most of it from optimization, not only across the contractor network, but inside FedEx itself. You know, I have a lot of contacts inside FedEx, and I work with them on certain things on occasion. And what I have found is now when I call to say, hey, can you tell me who's doing this or doing that? Man, the transfer portal is wide open. Nobody knows what the roster is anymore. And they don't always understand, well, is that function still in what used to be ground, or is it moved to express? And so there's as much tumultual effect inside FedEx as there is in the contractor network. And they're focused on themselves. Okay, I'm not saying they don't care about the contractor network. They absolutely do. But they feel they're paying us enough for us to be successful. And so what I try to help contractors understand in my consulting business, which is going strong, by the way, contractors need help these days, is in a flat or declining market revenue, then you have to control cost, right? You are not going to earn your way out of whatever financial situation you're in. There's absolutely zero new line haul runs getting posted. And on the P&D side, there's constant squeezing going on, right? And so then you have to understand how to get better at operating what you're operating. So you have to reduce your internal cost. And that usually requires you to think differently. You can't keep doing the same thing. So you have to think differently about how you do things. And one of the things that we've brought to the table is, look, you have to minimize your overhead. So then what we have available in the My Ground Force solution is fractional services, so that you only pay for the overhead you need to operate your business. It's overhead by the drink, right? And so this is a way to minimize your overhead so that you can maximize your profit margin in a flat or declining revenue environment. You know, we used to be able to earn our way out. You could kind of plan every year you were going to get at least a 3% increase. On the line haul side, you usually be able to increase a run or two every year. And that was true from 1998 all the way until 2022. And then starting in 2023, for the first time in the history of the network, contractors started having declining revenue. And that turned the apple cart upside down. And, you know, as we know, I already used my business as an example. And so then we are not the first businesses in the history of business to suddenly find themselves in a declining revenue environment. We're not the first ones. It's not unique. There's nothing special about the FedEx business. It's just a different business model, but the fundamentals are the same. And as contractors, we have to do a better job at executing the fundamentals, because no one's coming to save you. You know, you have to do it yourself. And maybe you need some help. There's help available, but you know, that's the message. You got to look inside to fix it. Don't look outside.
Can you give us some examples, Tim, of those fractional services that you mentioned, some specifics on what those are that you're finding success with replacing to reduce overhead?
Absolutely. So, you know, the My Ground Force system is a system of record for line haul contractors. I get calls every day from P&D contractors wanting us to build a P&D version of My Ground Force. So, you know, I think we're going to do that. I mean, because there's enough interest in being able to use advanced technology to reduce your costs, you know, significantly by automating tasks that people are performing. And this is when I say you got to think differently, you got to get comfortable operating your business with fewer or no overhead personnel on your staff. You know, oftentimes as business owners, we get comfortable having people to talk to and help us do things and turn around. Hey, could you do this? Could you do that? And in the future, you're not going to have those people. Efficient businesses are going to be minimized in terms of overhead personnel. And you need to adapt to that. You might not agree with it, but it's coming like a storm, and it's already present across industry in general. And so what we do is then pair what we call technology adept humans with advanced software. So there are certain things that happen in your company that do require a human to be involved. Sometimes the software does work, and then we need a human to approve it. So we have those people on staff. Maybe you hire a new person and they need to be onboarding into the system. Well, we can do that. Maybe the schedule needs approved every day so that you can make sure you accounted for all the various variables that might be. So a human would do that. We would manage benefits, manage HR, provide a fractional CFO to do monthly or quarterly reviews of your numbers. Those numbers will be generated through automation. So then the cost to actually deliver that from our side is much lower. No one's calculating anything in a spreadsheet. So the CFO looks at your numbers and then can give you specific counsel on how you can improve your business. And this applies to line haul and P&D, right? I mean, you can do this for both sides. So pretty much anything that a human is doing in your business, except talking to FedEx, we can do through a fractional service. So that means that you just pay for the piece that you need, right? So including recruiting. And we also have a completely FedEx compliant safety program. So we review videos, coach drivers, provide safety manuals, review ELD logs, coach drivers on hours of service, completely outsourced, 100% FedEx compliant, and you have industry professionals doing your safety program rather than your admin who knows nothing about safety reviewing your videos or monitoring hours of service, right? So it's you'll be able to hire professionals in their particular field at a fractional price. And one of the things I found in my business, and most contractors find that, is you end up with a person who's almost indispensable because they know so much about your business and they do so many things. And so then that, when you do a risk profile of your business, that's a personnel risk. If that person hits the lotto and walks out tomorrow, you're in bad situation. So by having fractional services, then you hedge personnel risk because we have more than one person that can do these things. We can operate in any payroll system, be it ADP, Paychex, Paycor, Gusto, you name it, all of them. We have people trained on all of those. So it's been a great solution. There's lots of folks using it, and they're saving a lot of money.
Tim, you mentioned something about when you build a risk profile on your company, and if that person that you're relying on wins the lottery, that's a huge risk. What do you mean by a risk profile? What is that?
Yeah, when you're a business owner in the non-FedEx world, if you're a division head of a global division like I was, you don't get a whole lot of help. They're expecting you to perform. You're kind of like running your own company. I mean, my division did $125 million a year. It was a big operation with people in 40 countries. The CEO wasn't calling me every day saying, do this or do that. He was expecting me to understand what the company strategy was and ensure that my division was planning and executing sufficiently to support that strategy on a 1-year, 3-year, 5-year plan. Okay, well, if you're going to do that, you have to have a 1-year, 3-year, 5-year plan. And then you say, okay, well, you're constantly doing a SWOT analysis. Almost every quarter, you're reviewing, hey, what are we doing well? Where are we weak? What's changed in the environment in terms of our competition? What opportunities might have been created? And what threats do we now have, internal and external threats? And you're constantly evaluating that. You have a strategy that you use to get to your corporate objectives. So then what you find in the FedEx world is often our corporate objectives are not defined. We just wait for FedEx to tell us how much money they're going to give us. And then we say, okay, well, now that's my profit target. That's my top line revenue target. Here's my profit target. Well, it needs to be, you need to get better. We need to always try to be getting better today than we were tomorrow. And what's changed in the contractor network is, boy, you really have to do that now. And so when I coach people on selling their businesses or how to get better in their business, if you want to go buy a business, it's the same thing as if you were going to operate your business. There's really kind of 5 central risks that you need to understand. There's operational risk, which is what business are you trying to do and what risk is in that business. It's personnel risk. Do you have the right people? What about a backup plan if you lose this person or lose that person? This succession planning is a big deal in corporate America. There is every person of significance in the org chart. There's a succession plan, and that has to be in place. The other thing I used to, I worked with folks like Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan Chase, Citadel, all these big hedge funds and banks. And the first thing they want to talk to you about is, Tim, send me your business continuity plan. How many times have you heard FedEx contractor talk about, well, here's my business continuity plan? Well, you need to have one. Okay, if you want your business to be successful, by building a business continuity plan, you begin to understand risk in your business more deeply, right? And there's risk associated with personnel in your business. What's your truck risk? We call them tractors in the line haul world. Well, what is your truck risk? What's your debt risk? And then what is your organizational risk? How do you run your business? Is there opportunities to improve how you do things? Do you have a written process that you regularly audit for every compliance requirement that you have in this Fortune 50 contract? In the webinar series, I talk about there's 35 different compliance requirements in the line haul world, in the TSPA. 35. And 80% of contractors have not read the contract. So
80% of FedEx contractors have not read the contract?
80% have not read the contract. Hopefully, me screaming it from the mountaintops over the past year has decreased the number from 80 to 79. But you have to be, you have to be compliant with the contract. I had contracts with AT&T and Verizon, Fortune 10 companies, and I would never have thought for a second of signing that contract until I knew exactly what I was signing up to. But oftentimes, contractors will spend millions of dollars to buy a business and never read the contract. And so you're at a disadvantage, and you did it to yourself if you haven't read the contract. You cannot do a SWOT analysis if you haven't read the contract, because you have no idea what you're supposed to be doing. But in the line haul world, there's 35 different compliance requirements. So let's say that I was still in the Fortune 50 world, and I had 35 compliance requirements with my contract with this particular customer. I would have a written process for every one of those. I would have a work instruction that told the people who leveraged that who were responsible for that process, how they were supposed to do their work and how they would document their execution of that process. You need a system of record. That's why I created my ground force. And then I would have people on a regular basis who audited that process to make sure that we were delivering against the customer requirement. How many contractors do you know? Sorry, I bumped the table. How many contractors do you know that have that? But if you want to be successful, that's how you have to manage your business, because you can't do it all from the hip anymore. There's not enough margin in what FedEx pays us for you to get it wrong. So you need to work really hard at getting it right. And so understand what your compliance requirements are and organize your business to deliver those. So what we do in the software is we automate almost all of those, so that as you weekly settlement occurs, as you document your expenses and manage maintenance and all these things you're supposed to do, the AI is constantly taking all that information and executing the compliance processes without any people involved. And this helps you lower your cost to operate. And so this is what I mean from a risk profile. So let's, for instance, talk operational risk in the line haul company. I could talk about it in the P&D world, but I would not be nearly as adept at it as I could be in the line haul world. So I'll stay in the line haul world. So given what FedEx is doing, we know they're going to do a transformation, and they said they're going to reduce cost. And when you look at their numbers, a huge proportion of that cost reduction was going to come from the contractor network. They said it out loud. They weren't kidding. They weren't just saying that. They said we're going to reduce the cost of the contractor network. And they have, right? And look, I've said before, and I'll say again, if I was Paul Melander and I was talking to him and he could be honest, he would say, we got 2,000 too many trucks in this network and they need to go. And so that was what I said in March. What has happened since then? In the FedEx world, they have declared war on spares, right? So there's this thing in the line haul world. You have assigned runs, unassigned runs, and then you have wild runs. Wild means it's not contracted, but FedEx is, you have a truck and a driver or a team, and they're like, give it to me and I'll run it. Well, as they analyzed their network and they realized they had too many trucks, they declared war on spares. And I knew contractors that were running 10, 20, 30 trucks in the wild space, and they all went away, gone like a cool summer breeze, not coming back. And, this was a cost reduction for FedEx, and it was an optimization of the network, because as they reduced the number of approved trucks in the network, it forced them to execute better on their assigned and unassigned runs. Then they got a better feel for which of those runs did they actually need, and then they could determine what was underutilized from their target metrics. So wild trucks are at risk. You're allotted one spare truck per assigned or unassigned run. So when you look at your schedule A1, if you have 5 trucks on that, you can have 5 spares. And then spares is what FedEx uses to do what they call spots, what used to be some senior contractors call that P&D, and I always get confused when they say that. But it's not P&D anymore. It's spots. All line haul contractors, even doing spots, are on a line haul contract. And so you have to focus on those kinds of things to understand what FedEx is trying to do. They're optimizing everything. And so I guarantee you they've eliminated 2,000 trucks in the network or close to it. And then that gives them also, they have some key metrics they look at. So if you had a wild truck, that's a risk. You probably don't have that wild truck running anymore. Some people do. I hear it around, but it's dramatically reduced. Okay, FedEx announced then that they have a plan to double the amount of freight, I'll use that generic term, that they move by rail. In FY24, they moved about 7% of their freight by rail. Well, they're saying they want to get to 15%. So what does that mean for contractors? Okay, that 15% that used to be moved by contractors is not going to be moved by contractors anymore. And they're not to 15% yet. So that means there's still some optimization to come. And I suspect that primary optimization impact will be on team runs, particularly cross-country team runs. I think that's where the greatest benefit is. Look, the division previously known as FedEx Ground, we can refer to them as maybe, how we used to refer to Voldemort, is that they could get to 80% of the country within 48 hours. So 80% of the U.S. population could be reached within 48 hours. It was a huge, huge advantage over the competition. And this is what the FedEx network was designed to do. But not every package, not every shipment has to be to the end customer in 48 hours. And so what they're doing is anything that's not time dependent or gives them enough time to get it there, particularly if it's resupply of a distribution center, it's probably got a week or two to get there. They're moving it by rail. And so that's going to lower their costs. Using rail is way less expensive than using trucks. So if you're doing that kind of work now, that's going to be at risk in the future as they begin to optimize how they're moving freight by rail. And I suspect that's going to be a slow transition rather than a fast transition. That's not an easy thing to do. Do rail yards have capacity? Do they, et cetera, et cetera? So it's not an easy thing to do, but that's coming. That optimization is yet to be achieved. What are other optimizations that will impact your business? Well, for instance, in the line haul world, they have looked really hard at empty trailers. So it's not uncommon, and I did this in my business, to run from a small station with empty trailers and bring back loaded trailers. or a run with a partially filled one trailer, so you got 1 3/4 empty trailers, and come back with one loaded trailer. Okay, well, they have run the math on that, and they have eliminated that to the extent possible. They eliminated 7-day deliveries, right? They lost $500 million doing that. That convinced them that was a bad idea. And so then they eliminated 7-day delivery, except in, let's call it the NFL cities and maybe a couple others. And so there are a few Saturday night runs, but very few. And as compared to what it used to be, every run ran Saturdays and on Saturday nights, and it doesn't do that anymore. These are all optimizations. And then they looked at volume in particular stations and in particular hubs, and they reorganized the route structure to eliminate runs. And so all that's occurred, last week it was earlier this week, the new list of, sorry, I kicked the table again. They come out with a new list of runs that are being optimized. Okay, that list used to be pages and pages long. Fortunately, this week, it was only 1 page long. And what were they doing? They're just using Google Maps and looking at every single run and seeing if they can run it with shorter miles. Let's use an example. So from the route that used to be the paid route from Anniston, Alabama to the primary hub in Marietta was 120 miles, 118 miles. And then they optimized it to 98 miles. So they cut 40 miles a day off of that business. So 240, 250 miles a week. So they cut 12,000 miles off that one run. And they've done that on thousands of runs. So that lowers their cost, right? If you just take an average, including fuel surcharge of $2 a mile, they took $24,000 of top line revenue out of that one business that they had that one run. But multiply that by thousands and thousands of runs, they've put millions of dollars towards that cost reduction target. And that had a direct impact on contractors. Those runs aren't coming back. Remember, we're at 2019 volume, and volume is flat in 2025. You're not going to earn your way out of this. And this is just looking at the numbers. I'm not some sort of seer. I just pay attention to what the customer says. And then I've been a corporate executive. I know how that translates to action. And those actions that FedEx would take represent a risk to the contractor network. And so then I'm able to articulate those and help assign risk to my customers' businesses, and then they can figure out what they might need to do. And then if you're trying to buy a company, I can help you assign some risk to that company on what their optimization risk is, and then we can get closer to an accurate valuation. So look, this is how risk is done. In order to be a successful corporate executive, you have to be really good at understanding the risk to your business and how you mitigate those, and how you introduce risk to your competition, right? I mean, this is a competitive environment. And so this is what you do in what I call the real world, the non-FedEx world. And we need to do that. We need to do that in our business. Now, look, we had an escape valve in the past few years, especially. You could say, heck, I'm going to go run trucks for somebody else, Forward Air or Amazon or whomever. Yeah, that work ain't there anymore. Right? If you see what's going on in the general trucking market, it looks exactly like what's going on at FedEx. It's a depression out there. Yellow Freight went out of business and dropped 20,000 used trucks on the market. There's been over 50,000 trucks dropped on the used truck market this year from companies that went out of business. So your trucks that have 600,000 miles on them that might have been worth 15 or 20,000 last year are worth about $5,000 this year. Okay, well, what's going on in the world in general has devalued your asset base, right? You probably can't sell that truck for what you owe on it. If you want to trade it in, you're going to take a haircut. So these are real world risks that you have to understand and find ways to mitigate. So that hopefully that's an example of several risks that you need to be aware of. And I kind of gave you the 5 major risk categories that I look at.
That was a wonderful breakdown. Thank you. That was very specific and helpful. Question I have for you, I know you mentioned setting profit goals with the clients that you work with. What is a realistic for line haul? We'll stick with the line haul space right now. What is a realistic profit goal for a line haul contractor today?
Yeah, so realistic is based on how effective you are at running your business. So I'm going to say what you need to target, and others would back me up on this in my conversations with them, is you really need to be targeting 18 to 20%. And that's not so that you can do $1 million and put 200,000 in your pocket. It's so that you can have the money available to offset the risk profiles that we've talked about, in particular tractor risk and debt risk. You know, when I was a contractor and I started, I financed my businesses and my trucks because I had two entities. I financed everything at 4%. That's practically free money, right? In the grand scheme of things, that's practically free. Well, now you're financing things at 10, 12, 14%. So that debt risk is huge. So if you want to go buy a truck, you need to buy down that risk. And if you're going to, by putting a lot of money down so that you finance less money, even though you finance less money, the payment might look exactly the same as it looked in 2020, even though you put 20,000 or 40,000 down on that truck. Maybe you even paid cash for that truck. So I help my customers find truck solutions and financing solutions that can match their company profile. I used to break down, and I still do this for my customers, how much capital risk do I assign to that run every day? So let's say, I don't know, it's for every day that truck runs, it's offsetting my capital risk by $40. The other answer to that is because it's earning revenue and it's helping me manage my capital risk, I assign $40 of that to capital, let's say. Well, if that run doesn't go, I got to make up that $40 somewhere else. And it's either going to come from running something else and making up the difference, or it's coming out of my profits. And if I don't have any profits, it's coming out of my pocket. And so you know, one of the things that I say, and I say it only half sarcastically, there are a lot of contractors who manage what I call checkbook accounting, which is, hey, I got money in my checking account at the end of the week. I must have had a good week. Oh, man, that's a recipe for going out of business, right? And so what we do for line haul contractors in the system is we give them a profitability update every week, all the way at the tractor level. Now, you have to leverage the system and all its various components to get that data. You need some technology adept humans interacting with the system. But you could review your profitability every week, and it's not how much money do you have in the bank. That's important. But remember, you need cash reserves, right? And so we talked a little bit earlier about tractor risk. Well, what's happened now is the cost of labor and the cost of parts to repair tractors has skyrocketed. And it went up during COVID, and it hasn't come back, right? I call it the COVID hangover. You know, revenues did not keep up with inflation in the trucking network. And even though revenues are down, the inflation in the trucking network is still high. So you need to have a tractor strategy that helps you mitigate certain risks. And what I help folks do is find used trucks. You know, what I used to do in my business, I said, I need a used truck price and a new truck warranty. Okay, well, that ain't easy to find, right? So you have to create that. It's not out there. So what I did is worked with Freightliner to create a source of trucks for my business where I paid a used truck price, but I got a new truck warranty. Okay, and that mitigated maintenance risk. Okay, so I still have that program available. I have lots of folks that use it. It just lowers the risk in their business, right? And so these are the kind of steps that you can take to help you manage risk, and managing risk helps you operate more profitably. But you have to understand your business at the detailed level. You know, I tell people, look, your number one expense is always going to be capital, right? You spent likely millions of dollars coming in, and people say, "Oh no, well I paid cash." I'm like, "Look, dude, you can't consider your cash as free, right? You have to apply that. In fact, what I did is I had one corporation that I owned loan the money to my trucking business. And I've made payments to myself because that's what I would have to do if I'd borrowed it from someone else. And then I refinanced that loan and paid it off to myself. This is understanding how to leverage debt to your advantage. So after 1 year, I had no money in the business. It was all, I got all my money out and I was using leverage to operate my business. And that leverage is more expensive now, so that's not a good strategy. But I'm just saying, your money is not free. It's just a matter of really understanding at a detailed level. Capital is number one. Personnel is number two. Fuel is number three. And again, this is in the line haul business. Maintenance is number four. And the biggest part of maintenance is tires. And we have some programs to help you manage tire costs, both on the acquisition side and the operational lifecycle side. So we try to help in all of those areas to lower your costs. You have to manage, you have to have a capital strategy, a personnel strategy, a tractor strategy, a maintenance strategy, right? You have to have detailed strategies in each of these if you want to manage your costs down so you can hit a 20% target. If you look at somebody like Alex Fromm, who's well known in this space, he's running 30 trucks and he's doing it extremely profitably, but he's not putting the money in his pocket. He's using it as cash reserves and he's using it to execute his strategy. And he used to be a bond trader on Wall Street. I mean, he knows the numbers. And so unless something meets the numbers, he doesn't execute it. He won't buy a truck that doesn't meet the numbers. He won't buy a run that doesn't meet the numbers, right? And so in order to meet the number, you have to have the number. So as a contractor, you need to have the numbers. So then you need to have a process to get the numbers. And in order to have a process to get the numbers, you have to have an understanding of your business at a detailed level. You just can't come in and pay a bunch of money and think somebody's going to mail you a check. Those days are gone, right? So you have to pay attention to your business at a detailed level. Successful contractors are doing all those things. They may not come out and say, well, you know, I have a fractional CFO. He's helped me develop this plan. We have a detailed plan in all these key categories, and he's helping me review it quarterly. And I have an action item register that I monitor weekly, and I have people assigned to all these things. They might not talk about that, but that's what they do, because that's what I did as a corporate executive. That's what I did as a contractor. There's a reason why contractors are successful. They don't back their way into it. So if you're struggling out there, you've got to get your costs under control. I haven't reviewed a business yet that I couldn't help reduce their costs. And I'll just use this one example. I have a customer out west, been a contractor for 27 years. He comes on the software in January 2023. After 4 weeks, I always do a business review. And we look at their data and we give them an analysis of how is their business operating now that they can see things they've never seen before. And with just one action item, particularly on fuel, I saved them $150,000 a year.
Wow.
And look, I could give you their name and you could call them. They would tell you that. So they had three entities. They tested the software in one entity and immediately put it in their other two entities and are achieving similar type results, right? And so they're getting numbers you can't really get by hand. That's what AI helps you do. But, you know, this owner who had been highly successful, multimillionaire, 27 years as a contractor, he said, I've never looked at these numbers. And then he said, I feel stupid. I feel like I've left money on the table. I'm like, well, I'm not trying to make you feel stupid. I'm trying to help you save your business. And we just did. $150,000 a year we put on the bottom line. And there's other improvements that they're finding, right? So this is what you do. You analyze at the detailed level and you find cost savings. I'm 1,000% on finding that. There's never a customer that I can't help save some money. Some guys are really good, but there's still money there that can be saved. There's still risks that can be managed.
That's amazing.
It's true in every business, right? I found the same thing in my business in the corporate world. I had accountants working for me, and I worked them ragged. And we were constantly modeling things, and a model gave me the ability to predict. And then when we got the actual results, then we would see if the model worked. And if the model worked, we confirmed the model and then did everything according to the model. And this is how you do it, right? And this business, Alex says this a lot, this business is absolutely designed to be operated according to a comprehensive model. And you know how I know that? Because that's how FedEx is looking at you. They look at a contractor, they have developed this model, and they're laying it on your company. Now, they're not looking at you specifically. That model is universal, but it's generating, that model is generating what they think they need to pay you in this market for you to be successful, right? They might pay you 1 penny more in Birmingham and 1 penny less in Memphis, 2 pennies more in Chicago, 3 pennies less in Oklahoma, because they have a model that they've developed that they're applying, and they're using real world numbers. Now, I can quibble with them on their numbers, and I have, but their methodology is sound. They have a methodology that they follow. They have targets that they're trying to hit. You know, they raise the fuel surcharge because they have seen that the average miles per gallon across the fleet has gone up. And they have an intention of only a certain percentage of line haul revenue should come from FedEx for fuel. And as your truck performance improves, they pay you less money. That's how it works, right? So that's how it works everywhere. It's not unique to FedEx. So this is, you know, hopefully that's helpful, but that's how you have to look at costs in order to achieve a 20% target. And then at least 10% of those profits, so half of those profits, 10%, if you're, we'll use $1 million as an example, that's about 4 runs in revenue. So if you're able to hit a 20% target, that's 200,000, you need to reserve at least 100,000 of that to mitigate risks in your business, right? What if you had a guy missed his training, you didn't have the compliance process you need to have, and he had a wreck? I have a customer that had that. And brand new driver, they didn't make sure he did his line haul training on day 1. On day 2, he wrecked the truck. Cost him $56,000.
Oh my gosh.
Where do you get that money if you're not retaining it from past profits? That'll put you out of business. Okay, so this is why it's important to have compliance programs that you pay attention to. You can't back your way into that. Like, I never had that problem for new drivers. And the way I did manage training, as an example, this is a risk that affects profits. You couldn't drive a truck till all your training was complete. I didn't even let you look at a picture of the truck until you had all your training complete. And then every month you had a target. You had to complete your training by this date. If you didn't complete your training, I put you on the bench. You can't drive, and I'm not going to pay you because you didn't do your training. And the software is sending you automatic updates all the time. Do your training, do your training, do your training. So if you don't do your training, you didn't do it on purpose. So I'm going to, on purpose, put you on the bench because I'm not going to allow you to cost me $75,000. This is how you mitigate risk in your business. And there were times I missed runs, so I lost revenue because this guy didn't do his training. Okay, well, you do that again, you're going to get terminated, right? So you have to have these kinds of detailed processes and key decision points where you control things so you don't expose yourself to risk that can cost you a lot of money, make you unprofitable, maybe put you out of business. So managing your business at a detailed level helps you reduce your cost. You can buy some of that cost at fractional prices. You can leverage the rest of it using automation, and you can operate at a lower cost. You have a program, you have a strategy for all the risks that are in your company. And then that's what CEOs do, right? As an owner of a company, of a FedEx company, you're a CEO. So act like one, right?
That makes a lot of sense.
CEOs don't do spreadsheets. I've had so many guys say, well, I can do that myself. I'm like, your time as a CEO is worth at least $75 an hour. right? That'd be $150,000 a year. Would you pay somebody $150,000 a year to do spreadsheets? No, you wouldn't do that. So why are you doing it? You don't need to do it. There's tools. Well, I don't want to pay for the tool. Wow, man. I mean, that will put you in that thinking, right? That thought, that way of thinking, of looking at business will put you in the fast lane to being a former contractor.
That
So,
paying for the tool is actually, I think that might be a great segue into our final three to thrive, which I know that you weren't asked last time with Ryan these questions, but these are three questions that we ask every FedEx contractor that we have on.
okay.
I know you've since sold your contract, so I'm going to adapt them a little bit on
Yeah.
the fly. But what is one of the most worthwhile investments that you see FedEx contractors make into their business?
Wow, I don't think there's just one investment, right? I think you have to have a comprehensive strategy. So I would think the best investment you could make is to invest the money necessary to ensure you have a comprehensive strategy. And there's ways to do that, right? One of the things I coach folks on is we develop your strategy, and then we'll work with you to get a vision map. And we'll put all that on one page, and then you post it in the bathroom, you post it everywhere so everybody knows what the strategy is. It's in a picture. And so that's the best investment, in my view, that you could make.
Nice.
You might say, oh, well, I need to do better on tractors, or I need to buy software to help me do these things. But all of those are components of a company-wide strategy. So I think contractors must invest the money, which would be time and effort and maybe some consulting from somebody, to help you develop the strategy that you can effectively operate your business in a profitable way. You don't just back your way into a profitability target. So what does the SEC require of public companies? Well, they require them to publish quarterly numbers. And then there's GAAP, right? Generally approved accounting principles, so that all the numbers mean something. In other words, they're normalized. So they're apples to apples comparison across companies. This number means the same thing in Apple as it does in Amazon, as it does in FedEx when you look at corporate numbers. So then you can have confidence that the number has a certain definition. Now, you might lack confidence in how that company does their numbers. We've seen that. But in general, there is a way to go about it. And so then you say, look, we really need to hit a 20% target. And so you come up with your plan and you model that, you forecast that, and then you see, oh, hell, I'm only going to get to 15%. Okay, well, we got to back out. And we got to say, I either got to reduce some costs or I got to find some more revenue. Okay, and so then you report that. And then when you say, well, I'm going to get this much revenue from these sources, and then investors like us, or not really like us, it's the big institutional investors that drive 95% of stock purchases, right? And they're going to say, there ain't no way they're getting that revenue. And so they don't buy your stock or they sell your stock. And so then it's, as the CEO, you're responsible for ensuring that you have a plan that protects the value of your stock. Okay, well, you need to do the same thing. You, as a FedEx contractor, you own 100% of the stock. So you owe it to yourself to have a strategy that makes sure that your stock's value is maximized. Don't do that by accident. You will not just back your way into success anymore. When FedEx was growing like this, you could do that. Because every year, whether you were good or not, you might get another run or two. Another run or two would mean another couple $400,000 in revenue. And you're just doing checkbook accounting, but hey, there's always more money because I grew this year, I grew next year, I grew year after that. It's this now. It's flat or down. You can't do the same thing anymore. That strategy leads to you being a former contractor. That's what that is. And this is real world. I use that term, business principles applied to the FedEx contracting environment. So the best thing you can do is invest the time, effort, and money to understand your business. And all these businesses are local, right? What's going on in Birmingham is not the same thing that's going on in Marietta, Georgia, is not the same thing that's going on in Savannah, is not the same thing that's going on in Kansas City. So you need to understand what's going on in your terminal. And the way you get that is you talk to your terminal managers, and because they have a forecast that a Fortune 50 marketing company has given them. They've been told what to expect. So go ask him, right, what to expect. And then look at numbers that are published in the real world from the Fed Brown Book or other sources. Read the FedEx details. Read the UPS details. Read the Amazon details. What's going on in your business segment, right? This is what CEOs do.
Yeah.
Right? They don't do spreadsheets. They don't write schedules. They don't drive trucks. You have to understand that, right? And so, anyway, hopefully that's helpful.
I love it. That's a great answer. It's not one that we've had before. So I think it's wonderful information and important to remember. So second question, I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this because I know you've had a lot of different business experiences, but failure in business can oftentimes be our greatest teacher. What is your favorite failure and what did you learn from it?
Ooh, that's easy. Unfortunately, that's easy, right? That tells you how bad a failure it was because it's not hard to remember. So I was working as a Fortune 500 guy, running a global division, and then the industry segment as a whole plummeted. So we went from $2 billion one year to $200 million the next year. And then my division was global with 1,500 people, and then we started laying people off. Okay, and then they would lay off other division heads and give me their responsibilities. And so I aggregated, 5 or 6 other VPs into my responsibility. And then finally they eliminated mine because, when you're getting paid a lot of money, then you're a target. So then I got reduced, shall we say. I've been laid off 4 times in my career, by the way. You got to land on your feet, but it's not like I hadn't been shot in the head. I have 4 times. So fortunately, I landed on my feet. I got another job right away, and I said I have to find a way to take the separation bonus that I got and try to maximize that value. So if somebody does this to me again, I have some protection. So it was a good time to do it. I got into the rental house business in the Atlanta market. So in no time at all, I had 19 rental houses and I had $2 million in equity. And I did that in 12 months. Wow. And, I had them all rented. I was making the payments and I had all this paper equity, right? And I had a lot of money in the bank as well. And then you remember the 2008 financial crisis. Well, that was precipitated by a plethora of new types of mortgages called subprime, which means folks that have never been approved for mortgages in the past, now we're going to give them mortgages. And then that led to an opportunity for mortgage fraud. And so then mortgage fraud was prevalent across the country. And then people bundled those bad mortgages up in derivatives and sold the derivatives. And the next thing you know, it exploded and almost sunk the country, right? But it did sink, it did sink McCain's presidential hopes because he said, I need to go pay attention to the finance issue. But it really sunk the economy and people lost trillions of dollars during that, right? Well, that subprime mortgage problem hit the rental market in Atlanta 18 months before that. So in 2006, I'm sitting on $2 million in equity. And in 2007, I'm bankrupt. Now, not personal bankruptcy, but I was out of that business and I lost money on almost every one of those houses. Because what happened, just as a microcosm, is on that street, all these houses got bought with subprime mortgages. and they never made a payment. They went into foreclosure, 2 months later, and then they got sold at a discount, and that discount was sales price was lower than I paid for mine. So now my rent is higher than theirs. And that happened all over Atlanta because of mortgage fraud. Atlanta was one of the worst places in the country for mortgage fraud. And I got swept up in that. I did not see it coming. I did not do an effective SWOT analysis and understand my business at the detailed level enough. I was doing great on the operational side, but on the strategic side, I assumed I had a level of knowledge that I proved I did not have. And I learned some hard lessons in that. And it cost me an unbelievable amount of money. And, I recovered, but I didn't recover in one day. And I learned a lot. So you can see why I'm passionate about understanding what's going on in your business, because I got kicked in the head because I didn't. And there's been a lot of contractors get kicked in the head. And they looked at FedEx, why are you doing this to me? And they're not doing it to you. You're doing it to yourself. You have to find a way to be in this business successfully. You own the business. You owe it to your people to be successful. I use this example as well. I had a customer say, because I'm like, dude, you're overpaying. And he said, well, I'm doing that because I want to be known as a great employer and I want my people to be happy. I'm like, well, I'm sure your people are happy, but let me teach you a lesson. The way you make sure that your people are happy as a CEO is you stay in business. That's your job as a CEO. Stay in business. And if you keep overpaying, you will not stay in business. There's specific targets you need to hit for the percentage of revenue applied to payroll. And if you exceed that, that money's got to come from somewhere else. And it's likely coming from your profit line. And then you're going to say, how come I'm only making 9%? FedEx, you're not treating me right. Well, you're overpaying by 20%. And look, it's easy to do right now because during COVID, we had to overpay just to get a driver, right? And now there's plenty of drivers on the line haul side, but we might still be overpaying for those drivers that we've had for more than 2 years. So I've actually coached customers on how to remake their workforce at a lower wage level, right? You can't go to a guy that you're paying $70,000 a year and say, look, I can't afford to pay you but $55,000. He's going to quit.
For sure.
Right? Okay, well then go source a guy at $55,000 and then let that guy know that you can't afford him anymore. Okay, you have to have a strategy. Now, I'm not saying not take care of him. When I laid people off, they got essentially a separation package. I extended their benefits for a while. All these things, I took care of them as best I could. But look, managing personnel risk is key to your company success. And that's just one example of many things that you have to look at. So we have the COVID hangover in wages. Don't live with it, fix it. If you go buy a company, you're going to say, they're overpaying for wages. Okay? Fix it when you buy it. And you already know it's there. So fix it before you buy it so that when you buy it, you implement your solution. Don't live with it. So all this stuff sounds like common sense, but it's only common sense if you've done the work to understand the business at a deep enough level so that then you know the levers to pull that gets you to your goal. And I've done enough of that I can make it sound as if it's common sense, but it only comes from years of really hard work and failure along the way.
Yeah, that's a brutal failure, Tim, but I'm glad you made it through the other side. Thank you for sharing that. Our last question is typically, what's your favorite part about being a FedEx contractor? You are no longer with FedEx as of a couple of months ago. So my new question is, what is your favorite part about FedEx?
Okay, well, I've already said that a little bit in this business. So in 2018, I started as a contractor. Before the 8 years before that, I was working in a private equity startup owned by billionaires. Actually, it was part owned by Fred Smith, though I never actually met Fred. But the owner was a former C-level executive at FedEx, board member, etc. And I knew that this investment By the way, they made a movie about that company. It's called The Hummingbird Project. If you watch the movie, I'm the bald guy. You'll be able to recognize me right away. So it was a high-tech startup. It was very successful, and I knew they were going to sell it. And so as I started to see that there was likely some due diligence going on, then I did research on what I wanted to do after that, because I already knew, having worked in private equity, essentially being my own boss, I hardly ever talked to the billionaires. I just ran my part of the business, did my own thing, and I knew I would not be a good employee anymore, because it'd be really hard to tell what to do. That was just a weakness that I would have. And so I'm like, I'm going to need to own my own business. What do I want to do? And so I started looking. And I researched, I don't know how many business models. And I went and assessed all kinds of different businesses and learned what drives businesses out of business, and so that I could mitigate those risks. I spent 3 years doing that. That's why I learned these lessons. Number one, businesses go out of business because they can't get paid, right? And, if you can't get paid, you can't stay in business. So cash flow is the reason people go out of business. Number one, by a large measure. Then, so then they have a collections problem in the real world, right? They don't have the right sales strategy to match their environment. They don't have a good plan to retain existing customers or win new customers, and all that requires investment. So they don't have specific financial objectives that they're managing their way towards. And so when I started assessing these business models, what I liked about FedEx, and these are still true, as I mentioned earlier, they're going to pay you every week. That's huge.
Yeah,
right?
that is huge.
It is absolutely, when you talk to other people as they look at coming into this business, they're like, man, getting paid every week. I mean, who does that? That's like nirvana for a business. You get paid immediately. You get your cash up front kind of thing. Well, that's unusual, and it's very beneficial. You don't have to worry about being in the right strategic environment. FedEx is doing that, but you have to worry about your strategy associated with being the contractor or service provider to a Fortune 50 company. And, we all know the most powerful silo inside FedEx is the legal department. And it's that way for a reason. You just have to recognize it. It's furniture in the room. So then you just have to handle it. And so my favorite part of being a contractor had to do with the FedEx model. I chose that model for a reason. It was very good to me. I had successes and failures while I was a contractor. I did a lot of right things. I did some wrong things and learned my lessons. And I've talked about those lessons many times in other forums. So the reason I got into the business, those reasons are still good. It is way harder to be successful as a contractor in 2024 than it was in 2018. Yeah. I've said that many times. It's way harder. So I came into an environment where it was easier to be successful. But it is not easy to be successful now. And if you don't have a plan, you will not be successful. So we used to be able to be successful by accident. And right now, in the future, for the next couple years anyway, you're going to be successful by intent. Because if you're trying to do it by accident, you'll be out here with me as a former contractor.
Speaking of which, Tim, you have a couple different forums that you use to help contractors out. If a contractor wants to learn more about you, how can they get in contact with you? What's your website? Where do they find you?
Yeah, well, you can always reach me at mygroundforce.com. You can email me at tim.goff@mygroundforce.com. And you can learn all about My Ground Force there. We use AI to run your business. And with our Fusion solution, where we partner technology adept humans with our AI system of record, we can run your whole business except talk to FedEx. Now, we could give them a small language model that talked to FedEx, but they probably wouldn't want to talk to the AI. So you still need to have your AO and BC in the company, but we can do everything else and do it and ensure 100% contract compliance, right? So that's extremely important. There's a YouTube channel, My Ground Force. Don't confuse us with Ground Cloud. It's not my Ground Cloud. It's Ground Cloud. They're very successful. They do great stuff. And then My Ground Force is something different. It's a registered trademark, so we stand alone on that. You can find us on YouTube. The webinar series that we did in the spring has been extremely popular with folks, both inside and outside the FedEx contractor space. We usually try to make sure our content is not line haul specific, but contractor model specific. We're going to crank up another, due to popular demand, webinar series on September 17th. We're going to start off talking about the new TSPA, the Transportation Service Provider Agreement, what's changed and how does that impact you. We're going to have another conversation about FedEx announcement of quarterly earnings. They're going to announce on September 17th or 19th, and we're going to have that on September 24th. Then we'll take a week off for the summit in Florida. I encourage you to come to that. It will be highly beneficial. And then we're going to have more weekly webinar events after that. We're going to focus on tires a couple of weeks on how to buy tires, and then a week on how to manage tires. This is a huge expense in your business. And we're going to talk about how to get into business with experts. We're going to talk about how to get out of the business and not pay tax. So we're going to do a bunch of things that we think would be beneficial to current contractors as well as prospective investors in the space. And I'll be doing some of the talking, and we'll have some experts. So we're also going to do something ingenious, which is we're going to put out an email marketing campaign where you can suggest topics that you want us to cover. And we'll try to do those at the end of October, early November. We'll see what gets the most, who wants, which topic has the most interest. And
nice.
Shoot, if nobody sends anything, I got plenty of content, but I'm sure we'll hear something. So I appreciate you asking. Obviously, we have the Line Haul Summit every year, and My Ground Force is a major player in that. And I also speak at the Route Consultants Expo. So I think in 2025, we'll be making our rounds, and I'll be speaking at quarterly events around the country, along with other line haul experts with Route Consultants. So there's a lot of ways to reach me. I'm all over the place. I'm not hard to find. I'm on LinkedIn and everywhere else. So, you shouldn't, I always tell people, just because somebody has a loud voice, don't think they know what they're talking about. So, check out my credentials. You can go see them on LinkedIn. I am the real deal in terms of corporate experience, and I know what I'm doing in this regard. So check out credentials before you listen to somebody. But I appreciate you asking, and I look forward to talking to some folks that this is a great podcast. It has huge viewership. You guys have done a really good job sending Ryan into the sunset. I applaud you for picking up the ball and running with it.
Thank you so much, Tim. We really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, Tim, this was super valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Y'all take care.
Routing for Success is brought to you by AP Equipment Financing. In today's competitive market, it is essential to acquire the right trucks at a fair price and finance them in a way that makes sense for your business. Leveraging their extensive network of truck and van suppliers, the experts at AP Equipment Financing will help you locate the best deals on step vans, cutaways, panel vans, and more. Deliver them straight to your facility and finance them with low monthly installment options. Click the link in the description or visit apfinancing.com for more information. Routing for Success is an independent production of AP Equipment Financing and is in no way affiliated with or endorsed by FedEx Corporation, FedEx Ground, Amazon, or any other logistics company discussed herein. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Routing for Success.